Imagine for a moment that you are a Greek soldier in the 300s BC. You are in battle formation holding your bronze shield and spear when suddenly on the horizon, something appears that makes your heart race with fear. A wall of long spears stretches for hundreds of meters, gleaming in the sun like a deadly metallic forest. This is the Macedonian Phalanx, the military invention that forever changed the way people fought in the Old World and transformed a young Macedonian prince into the most famous conqueror in history. The Macedonian Phalanx was not just a group of soldiers. It was a perfectly built war machine, a song of destruction that brought together good rules, new tools, and clever plans in a way the world had never seen before. To truly understand why facing this group was practically a death sentence, we must look deeply into old military plans and understand how Alexander the Great took an already existing idea and changed it into the scariest weapon of his time. Let's begin our journey by going back in time to Macedonia in the 300s BC. This mountainous place in northern Greece was considered by many Greeks to be a wild and uncivilized territory, lived in by rough warriors who barely spoke proper Greek. But it was exactly in this seemingly behind-the-times land that the military revolution that would conquer the known world was born. Alexander's father, Philip II of Macedon, was the true inventor of the modern Macedonian Phalanx. Philip was not just a king. He was a military thinker who understood something very important about war. That victory does not necessarily belong to the bravest, but to the most organized, the most disciplined, and the most innovative. He took the traditional idea of the Greek phalanx, which had existed for centuries, and completely changed it. The traditional Greek phalanx, known as the hoplite phalanx, was made up of citizen soldiers who fought side by side with spears about 8 feet long. It was a strong formation, but it had its limits. Philip saw these limits and decided to completely fix them. He created the sarissa, a spear measuring between 14 and 20 feet long, almost twice the length of traditional spears. But the sarissa wasn't just a larger spear. It was a completely different weapon, requiring a completely different kind of soldier and a completely different kind of training. A soldier armed with a sarissa couldn't carry the traditional heavy shield of the Greek hoplites. Instead, he used a small round shield tied to his left arm, leaving both hands free to hold the long spear. This seemingly simple change had world-changing results. Imagine the deadly math of this new group. If you have soldiers in rows, 16 men deep, and each man is holding a 16-foot spear, the first 5 rows can present their spears forward at the same time. This means that any enemy approaching the Macedonian phalanx faces not one line of soldiers, but 5 lines of spearheads pointed directly at them. The way this made people feel was as important as how well it actually worked. Imagine yourself running toward this iron wall. You see no faces. You see only hundreds, perhaps thousands of spearheads gleaming in the sun, all pointed at you. The scary feeling of facing such a group was enough to break the spirit of many an army before the battle even began. But the cleverness of the Macedonian phalanx didn't stop at the sarissa. Philip and later Alexander understood that a group, no matter how scary, is only as good as the men who are in it. So they changed not only tools, but the entire idea of professional soldiering. The Macedonian phalanx soldiers were not citizen soldiers like the Greek hoplites who fought a few times a year and then returned to their farms and businesses. They were full-time soldiers, men who gave their entire lives to the art of war. They trained constantly not only in battle formation but in long, fast marches, building camps, military building, and a dozen other military skills. This professional approach created a level of discipline that was simply impossible to achieve with part-time citizen soldiers. When a Macedonian commander shouted an order, it was done with perfect accuracy. The phalanx could move as a single living thing, changing direction, speeding up, slowing down, all in perfect time. And here we come to the most important reason what made the Macedonian phalanx so terrifying to face. It wasn't just a still group, Unlike the traditional hoplite phalanx, which was mainly for defense, the Macedonian phalanx was an attacking machine. It could advance at good speed while keeping its controlled shape, creating a deadly mix of moving fast and hitting hard. Let's look deeper into the experience of facing this group in battle. You are a Persian, Greek, or Thracian soldier, and you see this wall of spears advancing toward you. The sound is very loud, thousands of feet marching all together, the creaking of armor, the Macedonian war cries echoing like thunder. As the phalanx approaches, you realize your options are very limited. You can't simply attack straight ahead. The sarissas keep you 16 feet away from the Macedonian soldiers, while your own spear or sword has a maximum reach of 6 feet. You literally can't get close enough to wound a phalanx soldier before he stabs you with his sarissa. You could try throwing things, arrows, javelins, stones, but the Macedonians trained for this. They carry their small shields, so they protect important parts, and the closeness of the group means that even if some of the front rows are hit, there are always more soldiers to take their place. Furthermore, the phalanx doesn't stop to let you shoot. It keeps advancing unstoppably. You might be thinking of attacking from the sides. This would be a smart plan except for one small detail. Alexander and his generals knew exactly this weak spot. They never sent the phalanx into battle alone. It was always protected by horsemen on the sides and troops specially trained for difficult ground. The Macedonian horsemen, often led by Alexander himself, were as game-changing as the phalanx. They were the companions, heavily armed riders who attacked in a wedge shape, able to break any enemy line that tried to attack the sides of the phalanx. Imagine trying to attack the side of the phalanx only to find yourself face-to-face with Alexander the Great leading a horse charge directly toward you. Even if you could somehow break through the side defenses. There was still the problem of the phalanx itself. Phalanx soldiers were trained to turn their formation. 16 rows of soldiers could, with proper orders, turn to face a side threat, creating a new front of sarissas pointing in any direction needed. But perhaps the most clever thing about the Macedonian phalanx was its ability to change. Alexander was not a one-trick commander. He knew that different situations required different ways of fighting. In open land, the phalanx advanced like a hammer, crushing everything in its path. In rough land, it could split into smaller groups, keeping its togetherness while moving around obstacles. Let's look at some of Alexander's most famous battles to see how this ability to change worked in real life. At the Battle of the Granicus in 334 BC, Alexander faced the Persian governors along a river. The land wasn't perfect for a traditional phalanx charge, so Alexander changed his plan. He used the phalanx as an anvil, a strong, heavy block, holding the Persian middle firmly in place, while his horsemen attacked the sides like a hammer. Working together between different types of troops was something no army of the time had done so completely. While the phalanx kept the enemy busy at the front, the companion horsemen looked for the perfect moment for a winning attack. Light troops, including archers and slingers from Rhodes, provided help from afar. Military builders worked siege engines, like catapults, when necessary. This mixing of different types of military forces created a military system that was greater than just adding up its parts. The phalanx was not just a formation. It was the center of a complex and many-sided war machine. At the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, we see another great example of the Macedonian phalanx's ability to change. Darius III, the Persian king, had chosen a narrow battlefield, thinking it would cancel out the Persian bigger numbers and limit the Macedonian phalanx's effectiveness. He was partially right. The land limited the phalanx's ability to move, but Alexander changed brilliantly. He positioned his phalanx in the center, but not as the main attacking force. Instead, it served as a solid anchor that held the Persian center in place, while Alexander personally led a terrible horse charge against the Persian left side. The result was one of the most amazing victories in military history. The Persian army, which outnumbered the Macedonians by at least 2-1, was totally destroyed. Darius fled the battlefield, abandoning his family, his treasure, and his dignity. But it was at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC that the Macedonian phalanx truly shone in all its deadly terror. This battle was fought on land chosen by Darius specifically to help his forces. It was a vast flat plain, perfectly suited to the Persian horsemen and scythe chariots that Darius hoped would break the Macedonian formation. Darius had even leveled parts of the battlefield to make sure his chariots had the best possible ground. He gathered a massive army. Estimates range from 200,000 to 1,000,000 men from across the Persian Empire. There were heavy horsemen from Parthia and Bactria, archers from Susa, elite foot soldiers from the Immortals, and a variety of other specialized troops. Alexander faced this giant army with perhaps 47,000 men. In pure number terms, it seemed an impossible task, but Alexander had something Darius didn't: the Macedonian phalanx and the ability to use it as part of a brilliantly coordinated battle plan. Alexander's plan for Gaugamela was a masterpiece of military cleverness. He positioned his phalanx in the center as always, but this time he created a special formation. He ordered his men to form not just one battle line, but two. Behind the main phalanx line, he positioned a second line of troops that could turn and fight any force that managed to break through the first line. This double formation created something never seen before, a battle formation that was almost impossible to attack from the sides or surround. No matter which direction the Persians attacked from, they would find an organized wall of sarissas ready to meet them. But the true cleverness of Alexander's plan lay in how he used the phalanx as part of a larger strategy. He knew that Darius would try to use his bigger numbers to surround the Macedonian forces. So Alexander came up with a plan that turned this Persian strategy into a trap. As the battle began, the phalanx advanced slowly in the center, maintaining constant pressure on the Persian center. Meanwhile, Alexander positioned his companion horsemen on the right side, watching for a chance. On the left, Parmenion, the experienced Macedonian general, maintained a solid defense with horsemen and light foot soldiers. The decisive moment came when the Persian forces attempting to wrap around the Macedonian right side accidentally created a gap in their own line. Alexander saw this opportunity and struck like a lightning bolt. Personally leading a horse charge, he pierced straight through the Persian line straight toward Darius. But here is where the discipline of the Macedonian phalanx truly shone. Even as Alexander executed his dramatic charge, the phalanx continued its organized and unstoppable advance. The Persian soldiers, already shaken by the horse attack on their side, found they could not retreat because a wall of sarissas was advancing unstoppably toward them. The psychology of this situation was crushing. The Persians couldn't advance because of Alexander's horsemen, couldn't retreat because of the phalanx, and couldn't move sideways because of the other Macedonian units. They were literally trapped in an impossible situation. The result was total panic. The mighty Persian army, which had marched confidently into battle only hours earlier, fell apart completely. Darius, seeing Alexander approaching his position with terrifying speed, fled the battlefield again. This victory at Gaugamela effectively ended the Persian Empire as a significant military force. In a single battle, Alexander had shown that even the largest and most mixed army in the world could not withstand the combination of clever fighting plans, professional rules, and inspiring leadership that marked the Macedonian army. But what made the Macedonian phalanx truly special wasn't just its victories in big battles. It was its ability to do many things. The group that had crushed the Persians on open plains could also change for sieges, mountain battles, and city fighting. Let's look at the siege of Tyre in 332 BC to see how the Macedonian phalanx worked under completely different conditions. Tyre was an island fortress city connected to the mainland by a narrow, built-up road across the water. It was considered unbeatable and had successfully held off sieges by Nebuchadnezzar and other conquerors. Alexander decided to take Tyre by building an artificial road across the water to the island. It was a huge building project that took 7 months to complete. During this time, The people of Tyre constantly attacked the Macedonian workers with warships, Greek fire, and missiles. Here we see the ability to change of the Macedonian Phalanx. The Phalanx soldiers not only maintained their traditional battle formations, they also served as engineers, builders, and defenders of the siege works. They built moving siege towers, operated catapults and ballistae, large crossbows, and defended their works against naval attacks. When the road was finally completed and the city taken, it was the Phalanx soldiers who led the final attack on the walls. Their discipline and professionalism, learned through years of battle formation training, worked perfectly for city fighting and siege combat. This ability to do many things was a direct result of the Macedonian training system. The Phalanx soldiers weren't just trained to march in formation and use their sarissas. They were complete soldiers, trained in all the arts of war. They knew how to build fortified camps, how to operate siege engines, how to fight in rough land, how to cross rivers, and how to survive in enemy territory. Most importantly, they knew how to work together as a united group no matter the situation. This group togetherness was perhaps the most deadly thing about the Macedonian Phalanx. In a time when most armies were loosely organized groups of individual warriors or small tribal groups, the Macedonian Phalanx operated as a single thinking thing. Let's think about the psychological part of this togetherness. Imagine being a lone soldier facing the Macedonian Phalanx. You're not fighting 16,000 individuals. You're fighting a single gigantic creature with 16,000 spears. Every movement is coordinated. Every response is instant. Every action is part of a larger plan that you cannot understand or guess. This coordination created a force multiplication effect that went far beyond just numbers. An individual Macedonian Phalanx soldier might not have been much better than an individual Persian or Greek warrior, but 16,000 Phalanx soldiers operating in perfect coordination were much more powerful than 16,000 warriors fighting individually. The rules and order needed to maintain this coordination was amazing. Consider what was involved in a simple turning maneuver. When the commander gave the order for the Phalanx to turn left, each of the 16,000 men had to do their specific part of the maneuver at exactly the right moment. The men in the outer rank had to turn in a wider circle, moving faster to maintain formation. The men in the center had to adjust their pace accordingly. The flag bearers had to keep their flags visible so the entire formation knew where they were and where they were going. The bugle players had to sound the correct signals at the right time. If any part of this complex human machine failed, the entire formation could fall apart. The fact that the Macedonian Phalanx could do such maneuvers quickly, even under the stress of battle and a hail of enemy missiles, shows the extraordinary quality of their training and discipline. This training began early and never stopped. Young Macedonian recruits spent years learning not only how to use their weapons, but how to move as part of the larger formation. They practiced marching at different speeds, changing directions, forming wedges to cross obstacles, and dozens of other maneuvers. But perhaps most importantly, they learned to think as part of a larger unit. A Phalanx soldier didn't make individual decisions in battle. He followed orders and trusted his friends to do the same. This group mindset was fundamentally different from the heroic individual mindset that marked most warriors of the time. The Phalanx soldiers' armor and equipment also showed this group philosophy. Unlike the Greek hoplites who often decorated their shields with personal or family symbols, the Macedonian Phalanx soldiers carried standardized equipment. Their shields were the same. Their armor was similar. Even their sarissas were made to precise specifications. This standardization was not just about making things efficiently. It was a statement of belief. The Macedonian Phalanx soldier was not an individual hero. He was part of something larger and more powerful than any individual hero could be. The sarissa itself was a marvel of military engineering, made of ash wood with an iron tip and a bronze counterweight at the rear. It was both light enough for a man to wield and strong enough to pierce armor. The sarissa's length meant it had a natural bend that soaked up the impact of fighting, reducing soldier tiredness. But using a sarissa effectively required considerable skill. The soldier had to learn to balance the long spear, move it quickly from attack to defense, and work his movements together with those of the men at his side. A poorly handled sarissa was not only useless, it was dangerous to the soldier's own friends. Sarissa training included complex exercises where soldiers practiced attacking specific targets while avoiding hitting friendly soldiers. They learned to use the spear's natural bend to deflect enemy attacks. They practiced close combat techniques for situations where the long sarissa was impractical. But perhaps the most impressive thing about sarissa training was how soldiers learned to use their weapons as a group. In battle formation, the sarissas of the first 5 ranks formed a nearly impenetrable barrier of iron spikes, but maintaining this barrier required precise coordination of hundreds or thousands of men. Each soldier had to know exactly where his sarissa should be positioned in relation to his neighbor's sarissas. Too low, and it would interfere with the spears in the row ahead. Too high, and it would leave gaps the enemy could exploit. The angle had to be correct. The distance from the tip had to be precise, and all of this had to be maintained while the formation was moving. The logistics, the detailed planning and organization of maintaining a phalanx force were also extraordinarily complex. Every broken sarissa had to be replaced. Every damaged iron spike had to be fixed or replaced. Armor had to be taken care of. Shields had to be fixed, and thousands of other organizational details had to be constantly managed. Alexander inherited not only a battle formation from his father, Philip, but a complete military system that included mobile metalworking shops, specialized engineers, master armorers, and a sophisticated supply chain. This system allowed the Macedonian army to maintain its ability to fight through years of continuous campaigning in hostile territories, thousands of miles from home. The Macedonian army's ability to keep fighting over such vast distances and times was almost as impressive as its victories in battle. Consider that Alexander marched from Macedonia to India, a distance of over 12,000 miles, fighting constantly and keeping the discipline and effectiveness of his troops throughout the journey. This advanced military organization also contributed to the scary feeling of the Macedonian Phalanx. Enemies knew they were not facing just an army. They were facing a professional military machine that could keep fighting indefinitely. There was no hope that the Macedonians would run out of supplies or be forced to retreat due to organizational problems. Furthermore, the Macedonian replacement system meant that battle losses were quickly filled. New recruits were constantly trained in Macedonia and sent to join Alexander's army. This constant flow of reinforcements meant that the Macedonian phalanx could take losses that would have destroyed other armies and continue operating at full effectiveness. The Macedonian phalanx's adaptation to different types of enemies also showed its clever fighting approach. Against the Persians, with their heavy horsemen and mounted archers, the phalanx worked closely together with the companion horsemen to create a crushing teamwork between foot soldiers and horsemen. Against the Greeks, who understood traditional phalanx warfare, Alexander changed his plans to take advantage of the limits of the older hoplite phalanx. The Macedonian phalanx's greater mobility and range allowed it to move around the sides of the more rigid Greek formations. Against mountain tribes like the Illyrians and Thracians, the phalanx split into smaller units that could navigate rough land while keeping order and coordination. Against nomadic peoples like the Scythians, it operated as a solid base from which the Macedonian horsemen could attack and retreat. This ability to change plans required not only flexibility on the part of the commanders, but also a level of training and discipline on the part of the soldiers that allowed for rapid changes in tactics without loss of effectiveness. The phalanx soldiers had to be prepared to fight in traditional dense formations, in smaller, more mobile units, as support for horse operations, or in dozens of other arrangements depending on the battle situation. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of facing the Macedonian phalanx was its unrelenting nature. Other armies of the time fought in waves, attacking fiercely for a time, then retreating to regroup. The Macedonian phalanx advanced steadily, unstoppably, maintaining continuous pressure on the enemy. This constant pressure had a crushing psychological effect. Enemy soldiers found there were no breaks in the battle, no time to breathe or regroup. The wall of sarissas simply kept coming, step after step, forcing the enemy to make desperate decisions under extreme pressure. The discipline that allowed this constant pressure also meant that the Macedonian phalanx rarely broke or fled, even under extreme conditions. While other armies might fall apart after heavy losses or surprise attacks, the phalanx kept its togetherness and continued fighting effectively. This resistance to panic and disorganization made the Macedonian phalanx particularly effective against enemies who relied on shock or surprise tactics. No matter how fierce the enemy's initial attack, the phalanx took the hit and continued operating, often turning the tables on attackers who had hoped for a quick victory. Leadership within the phalanx was also revolutionary for its time. Unlike other armies where leadership came primarily from above, the Macedonian phalanx developed a multi-layered leadership system that included professionally trained junior officers at each level of the hierarchy. This distributed leadership system meant that the phalanx could continue to operate effectively, even if senior officers were killed or wounded. Each unit had multiple layers of backup command, each trained to take responsibility if necessary. Communication within the phalanx was also advanced by the standards of the time. Signal systems using bugles, drums, and banners allowed commands to be sent quickly throughout the formation. Mounted officers could move along the battle line, relaying specific orders to different sections of the phalanx. This communication capability allowed the phalanx to perform complex maneuvers during battle, responding to changes in the battle situation almost instantly. While other armies were stuck in rigid battle plans, the Macedonian phalanx could change and develop its tactics as the battle progressed. The phalanx soldiers' physical training also set new standards for professional soldiers. In addition to traditional military training, the phalanx soldiers underwent physical conditioning routines that prepared them for the extraordinary demands of sarissa combat. Carrying and wielding a 16-foot sarissa required considerable strength, especially during long battles that could last for hours. Soldiers had to develop not only brute strength but also stamina, coordination, and the ability to maintain focus under extreme stress. This superior physical conditioning gave the phalanx soldiers a decisive advantage in prolonged battles. While enemies were worn out after the initial fight, the Macedonian phalanx soldiers could maintain their effectiveness throughout day-long battles. The technological aspect of the Macedonian phalanx was also constantly evolving. Alexander and his military engineers continually refined the sarissa design, experimented with different types of armor, and developed new tactics to maximize the formation's effectiveness. This technological approach to warfare was revolutionary for its time. While other armies relied primarily on tradition and past experience, the Macedonians adopted a sort of scientific approach to military development, constantly testing new ideas and adding improvements based on battle experience. The mixing of the phalanx with other arms also continued to evolve throughout Alexander's campaigns. Coordination between phalanx soldiers, horsemen, archers, slingers, and engineers became increasingly sophisticated, creating a military system that was truly greater than the sum of its parts. This mixing also extended to campaign strategy. Alexander used his phalanx not only to win battles, but as part of broader strategies that included talking with enemies, psychological warfare, and spying. The Macedonian phalanx's reputation often came before the army itself, causing cities to give up without a fight and enemy armies to scatter before battle even began. The scary feeling of the Macedonian phalanx became a weapon in itself. Stories of their invincibility spread throughout the known world, creating an aura of inevitability around Alexander's conquests. Cities that might have held out for months against other armies opened their gates immediately upon seeing the Macedonian sarissas approaching. This psychological warfare was carefully created by Alexander and his commanders. They understood that the idea of invincibility was almost as valuable as actual invincibility. Public displays of the phalanx's discipline and skill Elaborate military parades, and even the phalanx soldier's uniform and scary look contributed to this image. But the Macedonian phalanx was not truly unbeatable, and Alexander knew this. It had specific weak spots that skilled commanders could take advantage of. In extremely rugged terrain, the phalanx's long, dense formation became vulnerable against enemies who could avoid direct combat and use hit-and-run tactics. The phalanx lost much of its effectiveness. Alexander encountered these limits during his campaigns in Central Asia, where nomadic tribes used superior mobility to avoid direct confrontation with the phalanx. These experiences forced Alexander to develop even more sophisticated tactics, using the phalanx as an anchor, while relying more heavily on horsemen and light troops for attacking. The continual adaptation of Macedonian military rules showed one of Alexander's most important qualities as a commander: his ability to learn from experience and change his plans as needed. He never became too comfortable or too dependent on any specific formation or tactic. During the Indian campaigns, Alexander faced entirely new challenges. The war elephants of the Indian kings posed a threat the phalanx had never encountered before. These massive animals could literally walk right through infantry formations, creating panic and disorganization. Alexander's response to this threat showed the fundamental adaptability of the Macedonian phalanx. Rather than giving up his main formation, he developed specific anti-elephant tactics. Specially trained archers targeted the elephant riders. Soldiers with special javelins attacked the animals themselves. The phalanx learned to open passages through which attacking elephants could pass, then close them and attack the animals from the sides and rear. At the Battle of the Hydaspes against King Porus in 326 BC, we see these anti-elephant tactics in action. Porus had positioned his war elephants directly in front of the Macedonian phalanx, hoping they would break the formation through pure terror. Instead, the phalanx performed a series of coordinated maneuvers that stopped the elephant threat and enabled a decisive Macedonian victory. But perhaps the most impressive demonstration of the Macedonian phalanx's discipline came not from a victory, but from a strategic retreat. When Alexander decided not to continue beyond the Hyphasis River in India, facing his troops' refusal to march further east, the phalanx maintained its complete discipline and cohesion during a months-long retreat through hostile territory. This strategic retreat through India and then across the deserts of Gedrosia was one of the most difficult military operations of ancient times. The phalanx had to maintain its formation while facing not only human enemies but also extreme heat, lack of water, and tropical diseases. The fact that it arrived back in Babylon still an effective military force speaks to the extraordinary quality of its discipline and training. During these late campaigns, the makeup of the phalanx began to change. Original Macedonian veterans were gradually joined by recruits from conquered territories: Persians, Bactrians, Sogdians, and others. Mixing these new soldiers into the strict discipline of the Macedonian phalanx was a formidable challenge, but Alexander and his commanders managed it with remarkable success. This mixing of non-Macedonian troops into the phalanx showed another aspect of the genius of Alexander's military system: its ability to absorb and use human resources from completely different cultures. New recruits were not simply forced to abandon their military traditions. Rather, their unique skills were incorporated into the broader Macedonian system. Persian archers, for example, were integrated as specialized support units for the phalanx. Bactrian horsemen was added to the companions. Sogdian foot soldiers was trained in mountain combat techniques that complemented the phalanx's capabilities in difficult terrain. This military-cultural mix created an army that was truly international, yet maintained the discipline and efficiency characteristic of the original Macedonian phalanx. It was a feat of military organization that would not be matched for centuries. The influence of the Macedonian phalanx on military art continued long after Alexander's death. Alexander's successors, the Diadochi, all based their armies on variations of the Macedonian phalanx. During the Wars of the Successors, which lasted decades after Alexander's death, phalanx armies fought other phalanx armies in a series of conflicts that devastated the Hellenistic world. These phalanx battles showed both the strengths and weaknesses of the formation. When two Macedonian phalanxes met in direct combat, the outcome often depended on small factors: the quality of training, the experience of the officers, the effectiveness of the supporting troops, and even troop morale. The Battle of Gaugamela in 316 BC between Antigonus and Eumenes showed how two similar phalanxes could fight for hours without a decisive result until secondary factors, in this case a well-executed horse charge, determined the final outcome. The Romans, who eventually conquered all of Alexander's successors, studied the Macedonian phalanx intensively before developing tactics to defeat it. They understood that the phalanx's strength, its dense, coordinated formation, was also its main weakness. In rugged terrain, or against enemies who could avoid direct frontal combat, the phalanx lost much of its effectiveness. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, where Roman legions defeated the phalanx of the Macedonian king Perseus, marked the end of the phalanx's era as a dominant military force. But even in this defeat, the phalanx showed its lethal capacity. The first Roman charges were completely pushed back by the wall of Sarissus, and only when the rugged terrain forced gaps in the Macedonian formation were the legionaries able to get in and break the phalanx. Even after its military obsolescence, when it was no longer the best, the Macedonian phalanx continued to fascinate military strategists. Napoleon studied Alexander's tactics extensively. Modern commanders still study the foot soldier horse coordination that Alexander perfected. The principles of discipline, professional training, and unit coordination that the Macedonian phalanx represented remain important in modern warfare. The Macedonian phalanx also left a profound cultural legacy. The image of the disciplined professional soldier fighting not for personal glory, but as part of a larger military machine became an ideal that influenced military traditions throughout history. The very idea of a standing professional army constantly trained and uniformly equipped can be traced back to the innovations of Philip II and Alexander. In terms of broader historical impact, the Macedonian phalanx made possible the creation of the first truly global empire in history. Without this military innovation, Alexander's conquests would have been impossible. The Hellenistic world that resulted from Alexander's conquests, with its mix of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, Indian, and other cultures, shaped the development of Western civilization in ways that we still feel today. The keeping and sharing of Greek knowledge throughout the Hellenistic world, the development of Hellenistic science and philosophy, and even the eventual development of Christianity were all made easier by the political unification that the Macedonian phalanx made possible. When we consider the final impact of the Macedonian phalanx, we see that it was more than just a military innovation. It was a historical force that fundamentally changed the course of human civilization. The discipline, professionalism, and coordination that characterized the phalanx set patterns that would influence military development for thousands of years. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the Macedonian phalanx was how it represented a perfect blend of technological innovation, great organization, and inspiring leadership. The Sarissa was a technological innovation, but it only became truly effective through intensive organizational training that allowed its coordinated use. And even the best equipment and training only reached their full potential under the leadership of commanders like Philip II and Alexander, who understood how to use the phalanx as part of broader military strategies. This blend of technology, organization, and leadership created something that was truly greater than the sum of its parts. The Macedonian phalanx was not just a weapon. It was a complete system for waging war that established principles that remain important today. For a soldier of the ancient world, facing the Macedonian phalanx in battle was not just facing an enemy. It was facing the physical representation of a new era in human warfare. It was seeing the future of military art advancing unstoppably toward him. An iron wall that represented everything warfare could become in the hands of truly innovative minds. And that's why facing the Macedonian phalanx was truly terrifying. It wasn't just the fear of death or defeat. It was the fear of being outdated, the terror of confronting something so much better than your own military tradition that victory seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. It was knowing in the final minutes before impact that the world had changed, and that you were on the wrong side of history. The Macedonian Phalanx was not just Alexander's secret weapon. It was his announcement to the world that the age of individual heroic warfare was over, and the age of professional, scientific warfare had begun. And to anyone who stood before that shining wall of sarissas, advancing in perfect unison under the Asian sun, this message was crystal clear and absolute. Today, as we study these pages of military history, we are reminded that even humanity's most brilliant inventions are merely reflections of a greater order. The discipline, coordination, and efficiency that made the Macedonian Phalanx so formidable were signs of eternal rules of organization and purpose that go beyond any specific era or civilization. Alexander may have conquered the known world, but his achievements were only possible within the greater plan of human history, under the power of the one who rules all nations and empires. As ancient wisdom teaches us, it is not by force or power, but by the Spirit of the Lord God that true destinies are fulfilled. The Macedonian Phalanx was an extraordinary tool in human hands, but it always operated under the control of the one who determines the course of time and great events, reminding us that all human greatness finds its true context only when we recognize the supreme authority of the Lord God over all history.